From bizarre royal habits to obscure laws that have somehow stood the test of time, Britain's past is filled with curious tales that will amaze and entertain. Welcome to History Scroll, and in this video, we will dive deep into the lesser-known corners of Britain's past. Whether you're a history buff or just curious about the oddities of British history, these facts are sure to intrigue and amaze. So sit back, relax, and prepare to be entertained by the strange but true tales from Britain's rich and diverse history. During World War I, as documented in Walter Kirk's diary, Mansfield Cumming, who served as the deputy head of military intelligence in France, experimented with invisible ink to send secret messages. Surprisingly, he was advised to use semen as invisible ink because it didn't react to common detection methods like iodine vapors. Consequently, Secret Service Bureau agents adopted the motto, "Every man his own stylo." However, this idea didn't last long because the ink gave off a strong smell when the receiver got it, and it also raised questions about the masturbatory habits of the agents. King Henry III had a polar bear in his royal menagerie, and it did something quite unusual. It went fishing in the River Thames, drawing a big crowd of curious onlookers. It's believed that Håkon IV of Norway gave this polar bear as a gift to King Henry III. However, this bear and other animals were a bit of a hassle for the sheriffs because they had to pay 4 pence per day to take care of the bear back in 1251. But that wasn't the end of the king's animal adventures. In 1254, he ordered the sheriffs to pitch in financially to build a special house for an elephant at the Tower. After King Henry III passed away, the tradition continued, and kings and queens received many animals as gifts. By the year 1828, there were more than 280 animals from 60 different species living in the royal menagerie. The 1831 London Bridge had a fascinating journey. The City of London decided to sell it because by 1967, it couldn't handle the growing traffic demands. A man named Robert Paxton McCulloch from the United States stepped in and bought the bridge. Originally, this bridge was built by John Rennie and his son, spanning the River Thames. After the sale in 1967, they took it apart piece by piece and shipped it to Arizona. But it wasn't an easy task. It took almost a year to disassemble it, get it to the port of Long Beach, and then transport it by land to its new home. Finally, in 1971, they finished putting it back together, but not over a river this time. Instead, it now stands across Lake Havasu in Arizona, and McCulloch got the land from the U.S. government for free with the promise to develop it. So, from London to Arizona, the bridge had quite the adventure, taking around 3 years to complete its reconstruction. Back in the 16th century, King Henry VIII of England came up with something unusual, a tax on beards. Yes, you heard that right. The amount you had to pay depended on how important you were in society. But that's not all. Even after King Henry VIII, his daughter Elizabeth I decided to bring back the beard tax. This time, she taxed beards that were older than 2 weeks. And guess what? England wasn't the only place with a beard tax. Over in Russia, Emperor Peter I thought it was a good idea too. Here's the catch. If you paid the tax, you got a copper or silver token as proof. But if you didn't pay up, they'd shave your beard off in front of everyone. Way back on January 28, 1896, a guy named Walter Arnold got the world's first speeding ticket in Paddock Wood, Kent. He was driving at a blazing 8 miles per hour, but here's the funny part. The speed limit back then was just 2 miles per hour. Can you believe it? In those days, it wasn't just about staying under the speed limit. You had to have someone walking ahead of your vehicle, waving a red flag to warn pedestrians. It sounds pretty comical now. Since cars were a rare sight back then, they could be a bit scary to folks. Walter Arnold got caught because a police constable on a bicycle chased him for 5 miles. So it wasn't as easy to get away with speeding as it might be today. When Queen Victoria got married, the cheesemakers in Somerset gave her an enormous half-ton block of cheddar cheese as a wedding gift. They called it the Great Pennard Cheese, and it was made from the milk of 700 cows, all generously donated by local farmers. A team of 26 milkmaids worked hard to prepare this massive cheese, and they placed it in a 3-foot octagonal mold back in June 1839. But when they finally presented it to the Queen on February 10, 1840, she politely said she preferred her cheese to be more mature. So they took it back, thinking they'd give it to her later for a royal christening. But here's where it gets even weirder. Some sneaky merchants tried to make a quick buck by making a plaster cast of the cheese and causing a legal mess. Eventually, the farmers won the case, but sadly, the original cheese ended up being broken and fed to pigs. Back in the late 1890s, London faced a pretty unusual problem known as the Great Horse Manure Crisis. There were so many horses around that some experts, like those at the Times, even predicted that within 50 years, the streets would be buried under 9 feet of horse dung. That's a lot of poop. And it didn't stop there. Each horse produced about 2 pints, a little less than 4 liters, of urine every single day. Since horses don't use toilets, you can imagine the mess they made on the streets. Plus, there was the challenge of dealing with horse carcasses because, on average, horses only lived for about 3 years. But here's the twist in the tale. Just when things were looking messy, the invention of motor cars came to the rescue. These new vehicles quickly became the preferred mode of transportation, and London was saved from the inconveniences caused by all those horses. During the Second World War, the British government did something kind of sneaky. They told people that eating carrots could make their night vision better. But why, you may ask? Well, they had a secret. The Royal Air Force had super advanced radar systems to spot enemy bombers at night, but they didn't want the enemy to know. But there's more to the story. The government also had a lot of carrots they needed to use up because they had too many, and food was getting scarce due to the war. Plus, they wanted to teach people to cook wisely and save money. The BBC even had a show called From the Kitchen Front that gave tips on healthy and budget-friendly eating. The result? People stayed healthy despite Germany trying to block their food supplies by 1941. So, carrots actually played a big role in keeping folks well-fed during the war. Back in the early 1700s, gin became a big problem, especially among the poor and everyday folks. It got so out of hand that it was like an epidemic. This era even got a catchy name, the gin craze. For those who don't know, gin is a distilled alcoholic drink, flavored with juniper berries and other botanical ingredients. Now, to try and control the situation, the British government passed 5 different laws in the first half of the century. But people often broke these laws and even got violent with those who tried to catch the illegal gin makers. On average, a person was downing about 10 liters of gin every year. But then, in 1751, the Gin Act came along. It had strict rules for making and selling gin, and at the same time, the cost of the grain used to make it went up. That's when the gin craze finally started to calm down. On October 17, 1814, something really strange happened. A gigantic beer vat burst, and it set off a chain reaction with other vats. The result? A massive wave of beer, 1.41 million liters of it, flooded the parish. It was a terrible event, and sadly, at least 8 people lost their lives. This beer wave didn't just stop there. It destroyed 2 houses, wrecked the walls of a pub, trapping a teenage girl inside, and filled the basements where many poor families lived. The incident was called the London Beer Flood. But here's the surprising part. The brewery responsible wasn't held accountable. It was considered an accident and even blamed on an act of God. However, the brewery still suffered financially because they had already paid taxes on all that beer. In the Victorian era, people used to take family photos with their loved ones after they had passed away. They would dress up the deceased person nicely and have them sit in a chair, just like they were still alive. Back then, getting a painting done was costly and took a long time. But photography came along and made it quicker and more accessible. During the Victorian era, child mortality rates were much higher than they are today. To remember their loved ones, families would have these special photos taken to keep their memory alive. In the early 1800s, during the Victorian era, something quite unusual happened around Valentine's Day. People would send what they called vinegar valentines to someone they didn't like at all, and they did it anonymously. These cards weren't filled with love and sweetness. Instead, they had mean and funny comments about the person getting them. You see, while most folks were getting lovely Valentine's cards, some unlucky ones got these vinegar cards. These vinegar valentines weren't fancy. They were usually just a single piece of cheap paper. They often had unflattering pictures and mean comments about the person's looks, job, or intelligence. And here's the strange part. Back then, people had to pay when they received mail, not when they sent it. So, even the folks who got these vinegar valentines had to pay for the unpleasant surprise. These cards were popular among the poor and working class who didn't have much money to spend. Please like and share this video and subscribe to the channel for more amazing videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.